Hello, history buffs, time travelers, and scholars. Saddam Hussein's execution shocked the world, marking the end of a reign filled with terror and brutality. His fall from power and final moments were surrounded by controversy and grim details. This story uncovers the chilling truth behind his last days. Saddam Hussein's rise to power in 1979 marked the start of a rule filled with fear, cruelty, and total control. After the US invaded Iraq, the search for this elusive leader became a global focus. That search ended on December 13, 2003. When Saddam was finally captured. Saddam's early life shaped the man he became. Born on April 28, 1937, in a poor village near Tikrit, Iraq, his father left before he was born. Raised by his strict mother and older brother, Saddam faced a tough childhood that taught him how to survive and fueled his hunger for power. Growing up during Iraq's political struggles, Saddam became aware of the chaos around him. As a teenager, he joined the Ba'ath Party, a group promoting Arab nationalism and socialism. This involvement became the stepping stone for his rise to power. Moving to Baghdad in his teens to live with his uncle, a Ba'ath Party member, Saddam gained an education and developed his political ideas. By his early 20s, he had climbed the party ranks, showing a talent for manipulation and ruthlessness. These traits set the tone for his authoritarian leadership style. When Saddam became Iraq's leader in 1979, he pursued absolute power with an iron fist. His rule was marked by terrorizing his people and leading Iraq into destructive conflicts with neighboring countries. In September 1980, Saddam launched an invasion of Iran, seeing it as an opportunity to expand Iraq's influence. This invasion led to the Iran-Iraq War, a brutal 8-year conflict. Initially, Saddam's forces made quick gains, but they faced fierce resistance from Iranian troops. What began as a calculated move for dominance turned into a long and bloody stalemate. During the war, Saddam used horrifying tactics, including chemical weapons against Iranian soldiers and civilians. Towns near the battlefield were hit with toxic gas, causing unimaginable suffering. Survivors spoke of choking on poison and witnessing loved ones writhing in pain. The attacks left many with lifelong health issues and deep emotional scars. By 1988, after 8 grueling years and over 1 million lives lost, both countries were exhausted. Despite the devastation, Saddam claimed victory in Iraq, using propaganda to portray himself as a hero. He used this narrative to tighten his grip on power, silencing opposition and spreading fear. The aftermath of the war left Iraq in ruins, with a broken economy and shattered communities. Yet Saddam continued his oppressive rule, paving the way for further conflicts and leaving a legacy of violence and suffering that would haunt Iraq for years to come. Saddam's reign of fear and brutality. Saddam Hussein's rule over Iraq was built on fear, surveillance, and ruthless control, leaving no room for dissent or opposition. Every aspect of life in Iraq was tightly controlled by Saddam's Ba'ath Party, which ensured loyalty through a network of spies and enforcers. Friends, neighbors, and even family members were often forced to report on each other, creating a society where trust was almost impossible and fear dominated daily life. Even the smallest criticism whispered in private could lead to brutal consequences such as imprisonment, torture, or execution. Political opponents, religious minorities, and even perceived threats within Saddam's inner circle were systematically targeted. His prisons became infamous for the unimaginable suffering endured by those who dared to challenge him. Torture methods included electric shocks, severe beatings, and psychological torment, all designed to crush the will of detainees and send a clear message to others. Saddam's oppressive tactics isolated people, fractured communities, and ensured his authority went unchallenged. One of the most horrifying chapters of Saddam's rule was the Anfal campaign in the late 1980s. This genocidal assault targeted Iraq's Kurdish population, whom Saddam viewed as a threat to his centralized power. The campaign was brutal and systematic, involving mass executions, forced relocations, and chemical attacks. Entire Kurdish villages were destroyed, and thousands of men, women, and children were forcibly disappeared, never to be seen again. The atrocities reached their peak during the poison gas attack on Halabja, where thousands of Kurds died in minutes. Survivors described the sheer terror of running from the toxic fumes, only to witness family members and neighbors collapsing around them. Streets were littered with bodies, and the survivors were left traumatized, many suffering lifelong health problems due to the chemical exposure. Saddam's actions weren't just an attack on individuals. They were an attempt to erase an entire culture and identity. Beyond the Kurdish genocide, Saddam's ambition led Iraq into devastating conflicts. In 1990, he ordered the invasion of Kuwait, seeking to seize its vast oil reserves to rescue Iraq's struggling economy. This bold move, however, drew global condemnation and triggered a military response from a US-led coalition. The invasion marked another chapter of destruction in Saddam's relentless quest for power, leaving a legacy of war and suffering that haunted Iraq for decades. Under Saddam's iron-fisted rule, Iraq became a nation gripped by fear, where survival often depended on silence and obedience. His regime's brutality fractured society, leaving scars that would take generations to heal. The hunt for Saddam Hussein. After Iraq's defeat in the First Gulf War, Saddam Hussein maintained his grip on power through brutal crackdowns and defiance of international sanctions. His suspected development of weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, and links to terrorism eventually triggered the US-led invasion of Iraq in 2003. Within weeks, coalition forces toppled Saddam's regime. But the dictator himself disappeared, sparking a frantic search. In the chaos that followed the invasion, Saddam became a ghost-like figure, rumored to be in hiding or fleeing across borders. His evasion frustrated coalition forces, who recognized that capturing him was essential to ending his reign and stabilizing Iraq. To streamline the search, the US introduced a most wanted deck of cards where Saddam was labeled the Ace of Spades, marking him as the top target among his inner circle. The search culminated in Operation Red Dawn, meticulously planned to locate Saddam near his hometown of Tikrit. Acting on intelligence from Saddam's former driver and bodyguard, coalition forces identified two potential hiding spots, codenamed Wolverine 1-inch and Wolverine 2. On December 13, 2003, the operation unfolded with precision and high stakes, as soldiers knew capturing Saddam would symbolically end decades of tyranny and prevent him from rallying further unrest. The dramatic mission, carried out under the shadow of uncertainty, was a pivotal moment in modern history, a culmination of months of relentless pursuit to dismantle a regime that had terrorized Iraq for decades. In December 2003, after months of searching, coalition forces finally found Saddam Hussein near Tikrit, his birthplace. He was hiding in a small underground hole, camouflaged with dirt and debris to blend into the landscape. This spider hole was tiny, cramped, and a far cry from the lavish palaces he once ruled from. When the soldiers pulled him out, Saddam looked tired, unkempt, and defeated. He had a pistol with him but didn't resist. The man who had once controlled Iraq with absolute power was now a fragile figure in hiding. The news of his capture spread quickly across the world. For many Iraqis, especially those who had suffered under his brutal rule, this was a moment of relief and celebration. In Baghdad, people poured into the streets, tearing down his posters and cheering the fall of the dictator who had dominated their lives for decades. However, while some celebrated, others felt uneasy about what would come next. Saddam's capture marked the end of an era, but it also brought uncertainty about Iraq's future. After his capture, Saddam was taken to Baghdad to face trial for crimes against humanity. The trial was meant to bring justice for the countless lives lost and the suffering caused during his reign, but it was not without controversy. Iraq was still deeply divided, and the trial faced challenges from the start. Many questioned whether it could truly be fair, especially in a country struggling to rebuild after the US-led invasion. Saddam used the trial as an opportunity to make a show of his defiance. Instead of expressing regret or remorse, he stood in the courtroom as though he were still in control, calling the tribunal a tool of the American occupiers. He dismissed the trial as illegitimate, claiming it was meant to humiliate him and undermine Iraq's independence. His behavior in the courtroom shocked many. He clashed with the judges and often interrupted the proceedings with bold statements. While most saw his actions as desperate attempts to maintain relevance, some of his supporters admired his defiance, still viewing him as a symbol of Iraqi strength against foreign powers. Outside the courtroom, Iraq was far from stable. Violence continued to rise, and Saddam's legal team faced serious dangers. Several of his defense attorneys were killed, raising concerns about the safety of those involved in the trial. Critics also questioned whether the trial met international standards for fairness and justice. Despite these difficulties, the trial went on, offering a rare chance to hold a dictator accountable for his actions. And for the victims of Saddam's rule, this was an important step toward justice, even though it couldn't erase the pain of the past. Saddam Hussein's trial was more than just a legal process. It symbolized Iraq's attempt to move forward, though it also revealed the deep wounds left behind by his brutal regime. While his capture and trial marked the end of his reign, they also highlighted the enormous challenges Iraq faced in trying to rebuild and heal. The threats and rising tension during Saddam Hussein's trial revealed that it was more than a legal process. It was a reflection of Iraq's deeply divided state. The country was caught between the pursuit of justice and a landscape of unrest and vengeance. In such an environment, ensuring due process became a daunting challenge. The trial's primary focus was the Dujail massacre, a horrifying chapter that showcased the brutal nature of Saddam's regime. This tragedy began in July 1982, following an assassination attempt on Saddam during a visit to the predominantly Shiite town of Dujail. Although Saddam only suffered minor injuries, his government responded with overwhelming force to crush any signs of dissent. In retaliation, Saddam ordered a brutal crackdown on Dujail. Security forces stormed the town, arresting over 140 men and boys. Many of those taken into custody were accused of opposing the regime, while others were targeted simply because they lived in a town associated with the attack. What followed was a wave of cruelty. The consequences for Dujail's residents were devastating. Families were ripped apart, An entire household suffered under the weight of state violence. Many detainees were executed without a trial, their only crime being their connection to Dujail. The massacre left scars that the town would carry for decades. During the trial, survivors of the Dujail massacre bravely shared their experiences, recounting the horrors they endured. Their testimonies painted a vivid picture of the regime's cruelty and the heavy cost of Saddam's rule. For these victims, the trial was not only about holding Saddam accountable, it was a chance to confront the man responsible for their suffering. The overwhelming evidence and personal stories presented in court sealed Saddam's fate, leading to his conviction and death sentence. On November 5th, 2006, Saddam Hussein was sentenced to death by hanging. The decision brought mixed reactions. Many celebrated the verdict, while others questioned whether the trial had been rushed and politically motivated. Despite appeals from his defense team, the execution date was set for December 30th, 2006, and the sentence was carried out as planned. The execution took place under a cloud of tension and global attention. A mobile phone recording of Saddam's final moments quickly spread worldwide, sparking both approval and debate. Saddam Hussein's trial left behind a complex and divided legacy. For some, his execution symbolized long overdue justice for the countless lives destroyed during his reign. For others, it was a rushed act that failed to address the deeper issues within Iraq. Many of Saddam's accomplices and enablers remain unpunished, leaving a sense of unfinished justice for his victims. Even with Saddam's death, Iraq continues to wrestle with the painful memories of his regime and the challenges of moving forward. The trial may have closed one chapter, but the work of healing a fractured nation remains ongoing. Saddam Hussein's capture, trial, and eventual execution marked the end of a brutal era in Iraq's history. While his downfall provided some closure for the victims of his regime, the scars he left behind still linger. The trial, though significant, remains a topic of debate, raising questions about justice, fairness, and the lasting impact of tyranny. What do you think? Was Saddam's trial a step toward justice, or was it rushed and politically charged? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. If you found this story insightful, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. We bring you deep dives into history's most dramatic events every week, and there's so much more to explore. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.